Well, let's bring in Daniel Susskind. He's an economics fellow at Oxford University, and he joins me now live from Oxford. The worst recession since the Great Depression is what the IMF is predicting potentially for the world economy. What will be the practical impact on ordinary people around the world, do you think?
I mean, it's unprecedented. It'll be the first time since not the 1930s that global production will have fallen. And I think what's striking about this crisis is that it's a crisis for ordinary workers and for ordinary businesses. The millions of workers, self-employed workers in the UK, the millions of small businesses, it's a crisis for them. I think in that sense, in some ways, it's quite unlike the crisis of 2007, 2008, which began in the financial sector. This is a crisis that has began on Main Street rather than on Wall Street, as some people are saying.
So how do you recover from this?
I think we've seen, just as this crisis is unprecedented, I think the interventions that we can expect are unprecedented too. Around the world, we've seen the state take on a role that was sort of unimaginable after, in Britain and Europe, a decade of debating about how austere should we be. That debate just seems like it applies to a completely different world. Parallel economic universe. And so, I think the response to an unprecedented crisis like this is an unprecedented intervention from the state, and that's what we've seen. In the UK, for instance, the British government essentially underwriting the entire private sector through various forms of wage guarantee.
Yeah, and it's important, though, and you note this in some of your writings, that this is not an economic disaster that is due to any underlying economic weakness. I mean, these are outside forces that are causing this economic collapse. So can we then, I mean, is it possible to imagine a scenario in which bouncing back from this will be quicker than, say, bouncing back from 2008?
And I think that observation is why some of the comparisons with war are perhaps a little misleading. Our economy hasn't been leveled by bombs. We've simply turned it off. And so the challenge is, how can we make sure through the interventions that we adopt in the next few weeks that when we turn the economy back on in the months to come, that it's able to resume as close as we can the sort of performance that we might have seen before this crisis began, and that is quite a different set of interventions that are required.
And let's talk about some of these essential workers who are often paid minimum wage. I'm talking about care home workers, delivery people, street sweepers, the people who collect our rubbish. The value that we place on them monetarily from a salary perspective is so much lower than their value in times of crisis, right? Our economies, our societies would completely collapse without them. Do you think we will reevaluate their worth after this is over?
I hope so. I mean, there's been a sort of irony in labeling, as we have done in the UK, many of these workers, as you mentioned, nurses, doctors, care workers, and others, as key workers. And it's ironic because these workers have been key for some time, and for some time that hasn't, as you've said, been reflected in their pay packages. But also it's ironic because many of these workers are precisely the sorts of people who, under the post-Brexit immigration policies that have been drawn up, they're precisely the sorts of people that would have been excluded from the country. And so I hope, and I think there will be some sort of reckoning between, exactly as you say, the great social value of the work that so many of these people do, and up until now, the relatively small market value that we attach to their work through a wage. And I hope we, in months to come, having seen this very starkly, will attempt to repair that mismatch.
Daniel Susskind, thanks very much for joining us. Really appreciate it.